Imagine if you could build a private Ethereum, or another way I like to say is if Ethereum and Zcash had a baby, this would be the network.
Today, I interview the founder of Aleo.
The user journey of money today in crypto is broken, and we believe this approach is going to fundamentally solve that.
A layer 1 blockchain that's zero knowledge, meaning private, by design.
Everyone's talking about stablecoins. No one has talked about private stablecoins. I think in 2026, this movement is going to become incredibly obvious.
Because the future of payments has to be private.
Everyone is effectively creating these massive honeypots with their driver's license and passport and ID cards that inevitably will get breached when hackers breach these databases.
And while 99% of blockchains expose users' data by default,
Ethereum and Solana are public by default.
Aleo is the only layer 1 for programmable, private, compliant payments.
But that's not how the real world works. The way the SEC treats crypto is different from how Dubai's VAR looks at it, from Singapore's MAS, from Japan's FSA, from HKMA. Every jurisdiction has different rules, regulations, and requirements.
And in a world where the stablecoin market is still early.
So when I'm looking at DeFi Llama and I see the chart of stablecoins, Ethereum has 50%, Tron has a lot. In 5 years, you believe Aleo will be a big part of that chart?
Watch today's whole interview so you understand everything.
I think it will be a vast majority of that chart.
Thank you, Aleo, for partnering up today and making this conversation possible. And let's start, Howard, with you.
Sure. So I'm Howard. I got into crypto back when I was in high school. I actually used to be really into computers as a kid and would read tech blogs and stumbled across Bitcoin. It was like this internet money idea. I used to have this eBay store. I'd sell custom built PCs, and by nature of that, realized I could actually use CPUs and GPUs to mine the thing. And so that was kind of my first foray into it. It wasn't until my time in university.
Around what year were you mining?
This was around 2011, 2012.
Wow.
And when the altcoin started coming up, that was kind of right place, right time. I happened to be in university. I was a freshman, and there were all these discussions on, Litecoin and Dogecoin and Namecoin and really you name it coin. And so I got really fascinated. I understood what Bitcoin was at that point, didn't know the difference between these other new coins coming online, and got really fascinated by it. I ended up pursuing research with a professor named Don Song, working on alternative forms of consensus algorithms. And we published a paper around 2014 or 2015 on some of the new approaches that were being taken. And we'd surveyed the landscape and tried different ideas there. And around 2015 was when a new professor had just come to the Berkeley faculty. His name is Alessandro Chiesa. He's now known as the co-founder of Zcash and Starkware. And at the time, he had started neither of these projects. He was doing research in an area called zero knowledge proofs. And I got really fascinated by this idea and said, I want to work on this and work in this lab. And as part of that, we then kind of worked on underlying systems for Zcash, for example. There's this library called libsnark that we worked on. And around 2016, we started research around a project to build private smart contracts. So by that point, Zcash had just launched. It was basically like private Bitcoin. And we were like, well, could we build private Ethereum? And so we ended up spending about 2.5 years working on a research paper called ZEXE, which stands for Zero Knowledge Executions. And the main premise there was to say, could we build private smart contracts in a performant manner using zero knowledge proofs? And the short answer is yes, we could. So we published that paper in 2019 and got a lot of attention from industry and from VCs alike, who wanted to see this tech be used, for example, to build dark pools or to build private stable coins. And we said, well, maybe there's an opportunity to commercialize this. And so we started off the protocol and the company Aleo in 2019, and in the first year launched our first test net and got a lot of attention and raised our first round of funding with that. And kind of from there on, the rest was really history. We launched mainnet last year with Coinbase as our day one launch partner, and have been off to the races. Actually, at least today on this recording, this is the 1 year anniversary of the network actually today, surprisingly. So
Oh,
that's
happy birthday.
pure coincidence, but yeah, it's very exciting times.
For somebody who's never heard of Aleo, what is it?
So Aleo is a layer one blockchain that uses zero knowledge proofs to enable private applications with compliance. The best way to describe it is, imagine if you could build a private Ethereum. Or another way I like to say is if Ethereum and Zcash had a baby, this would be the network basically. It's a system that allows you to write smart contract applications and enable privacy in those smart contracts. So if you need hidden state, for example, you want to have confidential payments, or you want to build a dark pool, or if you want to build games that have a hidden game state in it, this is an approach that allows you to do that. And it's something that I would say kind of starts to expand what developers can express, and really opens the playing field to new types of applications now.
So give me an example, like what are real world use cases that are being built on it?
So, for example, one project that has been a big initiative is ZPass. The idea around that is to introduce verifiable credentials on chain. There's been talk for years about KYC, especially for DeFi apps, and you're actually now starting to see on kind of the Web 2 side of things, identity verification and age verification are coming. It's rolling out in many states in the US for certain websites, and also in the UK on certain websites, across social media, across Spotify, YouTube, Google. It's kind of coming out everywhere. And one of the main problems with the current solution is that everyone is effectively creating these massive honeypots with their driver's license and passport and ID cards, that inevitably will get breached when hackers breach these databases. And the reality is you can actually use zero knowledge proofs to demonstrate you're over the age of 18, and that you can say you're even an accredited individual without having to reveal all that information, through the power of zero knowledge proofs. And so ZPass is an effort to provide verifiable credentials where you can provide any type of attestation you want using your existing ID cards, to any third party or counterparty. So, for instance, if you're a bridge and you want to move assets to a private chain like Aleo, and you want to move large amounts of liquidity over, you may want to have some level of KYC on that bridge to make sure that this is not money that's coming from a sanctioned country or from a hacker group like Lazarus, for instance. And so this is a way to authenticate and allow people to do so, and maintain credibility that these assets themselves are good assets.
Talk to me more about your why, because I understand what it is, what you're going for, what drives you passion-wise.
Wow, that's a really good question. For me, a big part of my efforts on this is really trying to get crypto and the technology that crypto is out into the real world. When this first came about a decade and a half ago, with Bitcoin as the initial paper, the whole pitch was to enable peer-to-peer payments, right? And we see now, a decade and a half later, that Bitcoin's actually not a great system for that. It's become a great system for a store of value, but it has failed as a payment system. Why? Because it takes 10 minutes for a block to confirm, and realistically, more like 30 to 40 minutes, when you talk about multiple confirmations for that block. And the value itself is highly speculative, in that it moves with volatility all day long. And so if you're a merchant trying to accept real world payments with a system like this, it doesn't have those characteristics that you'd expect of money. And the most heinous of it is, of course, that the system itself is pseudonymous, meaning that both parties can effectively see what's going on in each other's wallet addresses. And in the real world, this is not how banking actually functions. The analogy I like to use is that, let's say you want to go to a coffee shop and you want to tap to pay with a USD stablecoin and check out and buy a cup of coffee. Well, there's a problem for both parties. When you look at the customer, they're effectively tapping and handing over their wallet address, meaning the barista, the vendor, the merchant can all just look at your address and now see your entire financial history, past, present, and future. And you've just opted into letting them track you for the rest of time with that wallet. On the other side of things, for the coffee shop, every single customer that comes in their door and checks out effectively now gets to look at how much money they're making every single month. And they're able to ascribe from the Block Explorer their business revenues. They can see, did I make more money this month over last month, this quarter over last quarter? Who are my customer base? Where else do they go shop? And the way that this behaves right now on a blockchain is not reflective of reality in the real world. And a big part of what drives me to build what we did is that we are trying to build a system that can actually work in the real world with real world requirements and expectations. The user journey of money today in crypto is broken. And we believe this approach is going to fundamentally solve that. For instance, with our consensus algorithm, we have 3-second block times. With our smart contract system, we have private and confidential compliant payments that can happen now. And with this system, you now have the ability to define custom logic that can ensure your compliance in all sorts of jurisdictions. For example, using that verifiable credential system I just mentioned.
The biggest thing, I think, that defines if an L1 blockchain will succeed or not, or whether it fails, is whether as how if they can get the developers to build on their chain. How do you do that? How do you get the people building here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So whenever building a new L1, I always think about it as it's almost like building a new nation, or you've almost set up shop on a brand new island. It's out in the middle of the ocean, and you're kind of just out there planting your own flag with no one else around, right? And this is one of the main problems. It's a cold start problem to any L1 that you build. And so the focus for what we've been doing has been strongly around getting wallets, stablecoins, bridges, and DeFi going on a chain like this, because this is what is actually the fodder that developers expect of a system to be able to plug in and use it and build their own applications on top. And for example, we can take it piece by piece. Developers expect there to be a healthy wallet ecosystem so that there's an easy way to transact and to hold assets. Developers expect a stable coin because if they want to do DeFi-like activities, they're expecting a stable trading pair to sell out into as traders or as market participants. And similarly, they're expecting bridges, not just asset bridges, but GMP, like general message passing bridges as well, because you may want to interoperate state from other systems over, as well as provide for additional token types on a chain like this. And in our case, the selling point for developers on why you'd use this chain over any other chain out there is the fact that you now have the capability to have confidentiality and compliance on a system like this. So, for example, you can have private Bitcoin, you can have private Ethereum, private Solana, private Polygon, any of these assets. And, this has resonated with a lot of our partners, when it comes to, for example, there's hardware wallets like Ledger out there. We know this, the team there very well. Charles, who's their CTO, is very vocal about this. That team is very proud to be building the world's most secure hardware wallet. But one of the main challenges with that design today is that every single ledger can be visible on a block explorer. You can just see how much money sits in every one of these ledgers. And as you probably saw from some of the kidnappings that happened earlier this year, this has become a growing problem in the crypto space, that there are a lot of crypto millionaires and billionaires who are really targeted and under the gun. And, security and confidentiality have never been more important because of that. And so now, the value proposition of Aleo becomes you can now enable hardware wallets to be not just the most secure, but the most secure and confidential hardware wallets in the world. And I think that this approach is what's going to attract a lot of developers because this is not just a problem for the average crypto user holding their assets. This is a problem for the financial institutions that want to come into Web3. These institutions hold massive amounts of capital today, whether that be in cash or in commodities or in stocks, you name it, but they do not want their assets to be monitored, copy traded, front run, and stalked by other market participants, right? And so, this is the opportunity here is to build a new ecosystem that is crypto native on crypto rails, but is compatible with how we think and how we act in the real world with money.
Do you see this as a direct competitor to ETH and Solana? Like this is a better mousetrap?
I think that it's a complementary solution to what they have. And the reason for that is that what we are enabling is not possible on those chains. The reason for that is Ethereum and Solana are public by default architectures. And once something starts off public, it is very hard to put it back in the bottle. It is very hard to put the genie back in the bottle because everyone has already seen it. Instead, what we said is let's build an architecture that is private by default. And let's start it off private by default and allow for the end user and the developer to selectively disclose what they would like to make public. And this is something that is manifested in what we see on Ethereum and Solana. They've given a lot of discussion around confidential transactions, CT. This has been a growing topic for them because they're trying to address what we're seeing right now amongst financial institutions, which is this demand for privacy, this demand for private Web3. And it's become very clear that those architectures cannot support it. For instance, while there is privacy pools and there's this effort to do privacy on Solana as well, the problem is that while you can move your money into a private pool, the minute you move it out and you start transacting as you normally would, your history is still visible. I can still go to your wallet address, see what asset it was, see how much you sent, who you sent it to, and when. I see all this information regardless, and everyone sees it on the network. And so there's very little that you can truly do to provide full end-to-end encryption and confidentiality for payments on a chain like Ethereum or Solana. There will always be ways to trace it. And you may say, well, maybe it's good enough privacy. I can tell you for a fact from so many of the businesses and enterprises that we've been talking to that good enough is not enough. Any little bit of metadata that's leaked is enough to garner in business intelligence and reports to predict the outcome of a business's performance. And that's something that really hits home when you look at the bottom line. Even just metadata of timestamps and frequency of timestamps alone can tell you, hey, is this business doing more payments and more point of sale transactions this month over last month, even if I don't know who the counterparties were or the amounts were. And this is why I say like you really have to start with a system that is intentionally and thoughtfully designed to be private by default. And that's I think the key difference between what we're doing and what Ethereum and Solana, these other chains are doing. And that's why I say we're very complementary. By building bridges between these networks, you can move assets to a chain like Aleo and maintain privacy and preserve confidentiality. And there are legitimate reasons that you want to transact in the open and make it public. You can do that on Aleo, but you can also move it back to those chains and transact there as well.
So no other private from the start blockchain does this, because I know other blockchains are experimenting with ZK.
We are the only L1 that is using zero knowledge proofs to enable private smart contracts that is live today. We are the only ones on the market today doing that. And I can say that with confidence. Like Ethereum, Solana, I just explained the pitfalls there. There's also the other side that people like to compare, which is the first generation privacy coins like Zcash and Monero. Remember, these are assets where they advertise privacy. But remember, for one, there's no ERC20 tokens on, there's no custom assets effectively. And secondly, there is no configurable compliance solution on those. So meaning they've designed a solution that's one size fits all. There's like a view key that lets you see all or nothing, but that's not how the real world works. The way the SEC treats crypto is different from how Dubai's VAR looks at it, from Singapore's MAS, from Japan's FSA, from HKMA. Like every jurisdiction has different rules, regulations, and requirements. And what you really need is configurable compliance for the developers to be able to operate in multiple jurisdictions. And that's where the power of private smart contracts really come into play. So I'd say, there are many shortcomings of these designs. And one of our benefits of launching a chain in 2024 as opposed to 2014 is that we have all these lessons learned from the past decade that we can see, where these different protocols prior to us fell short, take those learnings and incorporate it into a new system like this.
Do you see Aleo working with governments like the United States now that they're going all in?
I think it's absolutely part of the conversation. We are in a unique position as Aleo. For one, the foundation and the labs company are both US registered entities. That's something that I think is incredibly rare in crypto. As you probably know, many teams set up foundations in the Cayman or in the British Virgin Islands or over in Switzerland or Singapore, somewhere else to go do their TGE and run their foundation. And we actually made this decision back when it was unpopular to do so in the previous administration, to go set up a US foundation. And we started the company as a US C corporation. And, we definitely got called out many times when we were making these decisions, saying that you guys are crazy for doing this. And now with the SEC's administration change, everyone's coming back to us and saying you guys are geniuses for doing what you did, because it opens so many doors with this administration, and with policymakers to get guidance and to seek guidance and to educate them on what it is that we are building, what we're doing. But I will say that when we made those decisions, it was very unpopular, and there was generally a sentiment that people thought this might go the way of Tornado Cash will get shut down because we're all in the US and we're all in this kind of area where it's very antithetical to crypto. But at least for us, we made this decision holding our heads high. Like we are all U.S. citizens. Our team is based in the U.S. We're building this here, and our investors are all notable U.S. VC funds. And so, we said, why are we not doing this in the U.S. then? And so, we were very intentional from the get-go, and that has opened a lot of doors with different government agencies.
Talk to me about your cap table because you have some names. Who are they?
Yeah, so we have a long list of investors. For our seed round, we had Polychain lead that. We had A16Z lead our Series A, and then we had SoftBank and Cora lead our Series B. And that was a large round. That was a $200 million round. And we've had a lot of notable investors along the way as well. Samsung, Slow Ventures, Tiger Global. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of
Crazy, man. These
wonderful.
are names.
Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful folks who have been supportive and supporters of our journey.
What happens if a criminal, does something bad with the privacy? Like, can that be turned in? How does that work?
Yeah, so this really starts to lean into the compliance side of Aleo. One of the key things that we have been very conscientious of going out the gate is recognizing that events like Tornado Cash happened and that technologies that support privacy need compliance to work correctly. And the analogy I like to give is that when any new technology comes about, there are always good actors and there are bad actors. And the way that you use the technology will ultimately decide the fate of that effort. The best way to explain this is almost by analogy. If you look 20 years ago to the early internet, you had Napster and you had Spotify. One said, "Hey, let's use this new internet thing to let people download music and stream it for free, bypassing the entire system, circumventing it." And the other approach, Spotify said, "No, no, no, let's charge users a nominal fee and integrate with the music industry." And I think it's very clear which won out in the test of time. One has been completely shut down, and the other has generated untold billions of value for artists everywhere. And I think that that is a very good example of what's happening here, that you have technologies like Tornado Cash, and then you have technologies like Aleo, where one says, let me circumvent and help users circumvent the entire system and launder and mix their assets, including from irreputable players like North Korea. And the other says, let's integrate with financial institutions and compliance tools from policymakers to allow for people to transact and do payments in a above water fashion. And I think it's going to become very clear in a few years from now which stands the test of time and which really wins out. For us, a big part of our solution has been enabling developers to use compliance by design tooling. And we've enabled all sorts of things like rules engines and policy engines, enabling thresholding and multi attestations, using view keys to allow for visibility to select individuals and selective disclosure in those policies, and also working with advocacy groups like Coin Center, Crypto ISAC, Blockchain Association to help educate and inform developers, builders, regulators, policymakers on what ZK is capable of doing, especially on the compliance front that was missing when things like Tornado Cash came about or when things like Zcash and Monero were being built.
In the next 5 years, what verticals do you see Aleo dominating in? Is it voting, healthcare? Like, what needs this most?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, one of the main problems that I see in crypto is that there is still no good UI UX for money. And I think we are going to solve it using ZK. I think, today, 99% of all stablecoin payments are happening fully transparently. And I think by 2030, 99% of all stablecoin payments are going to be end-to-end encrypted. And I think that that is going to become the default. Yeah, I think it's gonna happen the same way that we went from HTTP to HTTPS, that overnight, like every website started to add the padlock on. And the benefit of that was you could now check out and send your credit card details over the internet without worry that someone's going to sniff on it and steal it or man in the middle attack you. And you could now create websites where you can make reservations and booking systems and generate so much value out of e-commerce that was not possible before. I think you're going to see the same thing happen in Web3 with stablecoin payments. And I think that this is a technology that's going to go and unlock that.
So when I'm looking at DeFi Llama and I see the chart of stablecoins, Ethereum has 50%, Tron has a lot. In 5 years, you believe Aleo will be a big part of that chart?
I think it will be a vast majority of that chart.
Wow, crazy. Um, let me ask you this, just the next year alone, 2026, as we look to it, what is happening?
Well, there's a lot of moving pieces. Like right now, for one, as I've mentioned, everyone's talking about stablecoins. No one has talked about private stablecoins. I think in 2026, this movement is going to become incredibly obvious, especially from my interactions with financial institutions and from stablecoin issuers. It's become abundantly clear that this is a missing user journey in crypto. And I think this is one of the big movements that's going to happen in the space is we're going to start shifting everything from a public by default setting into a private by default setting. I think with that, it's going to open the doors to private DeFi, and I think that's going to take off on its own organically. Additionally, while we are the first and the only chain today to support private smart contracts using zero knowledge proofs out in the wild, starting next year, there's going to be many teams doing the exact same thing that are currently building out their systems. There's teams like Aztec and Maiden and Canton that are all working on similar ideas. They've spent just as long, if not longer, number of years working on this, but they're not live yet. And I think they will go live, and this will start to validate a lot of the hypotheses and theses that we have around private stablecoins and private payments, private DeFi. But I think this is going to be a massive movement that comes in this coming year.
What is Aleo proof of work?
Aleo has a hybrid consensus algorithm. So
Okay.
fundamentally, we use a proof of stake system to produce blocks. However, we tacked on a puzzle that allows for provers, as we call them, to effectively generate solutions and earn tokens for it. So it's a token distribution mechanism that we have with this proof of work puzzle. That is a system that's designed to decay over 10 years linearly, so that in 10 years from now, effectively that goes to zero, while the network goes into pure proof of stake. The reason we made this decision was that we, again, had the benefit of looking at previous chains and learned from their successes and failures. It was very obvious when you look at Bitcoin and look at Ethereum that proof of work was an amazing distribution mechanism for their tokens. Why? Because early adopters did not have to go to VCs to buy the token. They could just go and mine it themselves. And we said that seems like a great mechanism to enabling distribution for a new chain. The downside, of course, is the energy efficiency side of it and the block production side of it, that it's slower and less performant than proof of stake. And it has a lot of energy intensive resource that go into it. And so, chains like Ethereum, for example, 5 years in said, let's just phase this thing out and go to ETH2, which was a pure proof of stake system. And so, from those learnings, we said, well, why don't we just bake that into our protocol from the get-go so that we don't have to do this giant exercise of holding hands and jumping together, several years into the journey, that we just say the chain starts off with proof of stake with this stochastic distribution mechanism that's a proof of work puzzle and allow for it to linearly decay over a decade. So that's how we ended up architecting this consensus algorithm.
Howard, I'm so glad I had you on today. I feel I have such like a much, much, much better understanding of Aleo. Aleo, let me ask you this. At the end of the day, when you're alone, what keeps you up at night?
That's a great question. For me, a lot of the open questions for me always come down to how do I build a better system than what I have today? You look at all of these new wallets and dexes and bridges that are all coming out, and they're using some incredible tech under them. Just to call out a few, I'm seeing these new wallets where you can effectively just Face ID, and it creates an iCloud passkey, and you're in. There's no seed phrase, there's no onboarding steps, there's none of this friction. And I'm like, how do I bring this type of technology to Aleo? Similarly, you look at perp dexes like Hyperliquid that are taking off, and you look at their block explorer, and these chains are producing blocks, literally by the 100 millisecond mark. Whereas old blockchains would take several seconds, if not minutes, to produce a block. And I'm like, how do I make sure that we stay competitive in a market like this, where while privacy is the key point that we are offering, and it's a unique value proposition that no one else can deliver today in the market, there are other properties that we also care about that we need to deliver on to meet the bar and exceed it in this marketplace. And so those are the things that keep me up at night.
What didn't we cover? Is there anything with Aleo that we missed?
Well, I would say, right now, a big push from us has been onboarding wallets, stable coins, and bridges. We've been working with our developer ecosystem to validate and test hypotheses around these. We've been trying out different pilots as well, for example, around stable coins and payments. And I think one of the areas that we would love to kind of as a call to action is to get more developers trying this type of technology and reasoning about how they can bring their applications over to a chain like Aleo. The value proposition, of course, is that this is a system that supports what Ethereum, Solana, these other chains can do, but it also introduces a privacy component that did not exist previously. And for us, we've been told by a lot of policymakers that we're actually writing the playbook as we go. And part of that is a discovery process of learning how do you build private applications. What's the user journey look like on that? How do you make it smooth and effective? And how do you design it to be compliant with different jurisdictions? And the only way to really figure this out is by doing it. And so, I'd say the area that I would really call it is I encourage developers to give Aleo a try. There's you can go to play.leo-lang.org, which is our playground, and there's examples you can drop down from. There's like 20 examples of different types of dApps and applications that you can just template and one click and it'll load up and you can run. And you don't have to download any software from this. It's just a website and you can go check it out from there. And you can even deploy your programs on there. And I think that's an opportunity to really experiment and see what this new type of technology unlocks or enables in crypto.
Howard, I want to have you back on in 6, 12 months, revisit how the progress for Aleo. Final piece of advice for new people as they enter the space in crypto in the next year.
Yeah, well, there's many chains out there, and there's many L1s and L2s, and they're all kind of extolling all these virtues of what they can and can't do. I'd say ultimately look down at the feature set and ask yourself, what is it that makes this chain different? And think about your user journey and what you need to build an application in Web3 today. And from that, make your own decision about what it is that is the platform that you should base yourself on. I think in a few years from now, it's going to be so self-evident that if the chain is not private by default and using ZK, it's very unlikely to stand the test of time. And I think that we're seeing that already happening in the market with, as you mentioned, ETH and Solana. They recognize this. They're trying to adapt. They're trying to figure it out. But ultimately, these properties make a huge difference, and you really need to pick your chain wisely there.